Take it away, guys.
Hello, Codesmith. My name is Jurassic,
And my name is Joe Kinney.
and this is UX Design and its Dark Side. This Tech Talk is brought to you and sponsored by Codesmith and Singlesprout. So what exactly is UX design? So first, let's break down UX. UX is short for user experience, a person's emotions and attitudes about a particular product, system, or service. A good user experience is intuitive to a wide demographic, regardless of age, ability, or expertise. So UX design intuitively is creating a product centered around that experience. Now, put yourself in the following scenario. You walk up into a building and you pull the handle and the door doesn't budge. You get embarrassed because you've walked through this door 100 times and you know in your heart of hearts that this is a push door, but you still try to pull the handle every time. Rest easy. You shouldn't be embarrassed. The designer should, because this is not intuitive design. The pull handle is a subconscious cue to pull the door open, and its existence in place of a push plate is bad user experience design. So there are 5 levels to US design. The first level is the strategy, the reason for the product. The second level is the scope, which is the features and the content. The third is the structure. The fourth is the skeleton. And the fifth is the service. And we move from the abstract to the concrete as we move through the different levels of the design. And now Joe is going to break down all of those individual levels for us.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Kyle. And now let's dive into the levels to make sure that none of us make any of the blunders that the person who designed that door did. So the first level of abstraction, which is pretty general, is strategy. And this is obviously very simple. It's high level, but it's actually the most important. So strategy essentially asks, what does the problem solve and who are we solving it for? So go ahead and move to the next slide. The reason why this is really important is because a lot of people, tech founders, entrepreneurs, people who design products, actually design solutions that fit into the green on this slide here. So in the upper left, we have the problem space and the solution space, and they overlap. And the blue dots are where things like Airbnb and Uber live. But a lot of companies that end up failing or products that end up failing to gain traction actually live in the green space. So the first thing that you want to worry about in UX design is actually designing something that people need. And one framework that's used to think about what people need, figuring out what people need, making sure that you're solving a problem that actually exists is the lean product process. And so you can see here that the market, which is in blue, is actually separate from the product or the solution, which is in orange. And so you need to make sure that there's target customers, they have underserved needs or a specific underserved need. And product market fit is basically making sure that whatever you're building, whatever you're making is actually solving an underserved need through a value proposition, a feature set, and interacting with the customer through an UI that they can use, that's easy to use, and that's user-friendly. And then finally, the last component of this is testing with customers. And this is where you really make sure that your solution is not existing in the green space, but actually falling within the blue, the solution space. So go ahead to the next slide. And so the last component of thinking about strategy that's actually really important and sometimes overlooked is a user persona. So user personas are tools that people who are creating products can use to make the customer come to life. This is an example of user personas from a company called the Pagoda Company, which is offering financing to graduate students. So this isn't a tech product, maybe tech ancillary, but basically we can walk through one of these cards so you can get a sense of what a user persona might look like. If we go all the way to the right, we have the MFA, Noah. He's a photographer. His problem is that he ran short on rent money at the end of the year, but the company offers money and allows him to afford studio supplies and rent through the semester. And then you have a little like playful, like iconoclastic boost at the bottom. So his images spark social change. So as you can see, customer personas, user personas are fun, playful ways of making your customer come to life and actually extremely useful. And UX designers spend a lot of time crafting these in the real world. Go ahead to the next slide. So The next level of abstraction, moving from the problem and the solution closer to the final product, is scope. So this is basically, what is the scope of our product and what content are we going to include? So if you go to the next slide, Kyle, we can see here that this is a tool that people might use to figure out exactly what they're going to offer. This is a real world example of an app that Kyle and I and a few other engineers tried to build. It's called Splitsbill, and it's an alternative to paying with cash or credit card at a restaurant. Ultimately, we ran into some issues with payment API availability, so we weren't able to implement this. But if we had, it would have been a success. And that's because we identified the must-haves that you need to offer to have people pay at a restaurant. And we had one performance benefit that was clearly better than credit cards or paying with cash. Essentially, when you're thinking about scope, it's often a scope reduction exercise, as I'm sure even the juniors are already becoming aware. Many people set out to do too many things. And good UX design is about offering the things that people really need. So go ahead to the next slide. The next level of abstraction, the middle level of abstraction, is structure. So this is basically like, now that you know what the problem is, what the solution you want to offer is, and what your scope is, how do all the pieces fit together? So if we go to the next slide, we can see that user flow diagrams are one way that UX designers map this out. So this example here is a bank product. Basically, you start, you log in. If the login is correct, you go one way. If it's incorrect, you go another way. Very simple, but ultimately this is important for UX designers being able to communicate with product managers, being able to communicate with actual programmers. So as a software engineer, you'll probably have these diagrams put in front of you as what you're supposed to create. So go to the next slide. The next level of abstraction is the skeleton. This is the interface design, navigation design. This is getting closer to what people typically think of when they think of UX. It's really also getting close to UI, which is used interchangeably, user interface. So if you go to the next slide, we see here that the tools to map up this layer of abstraction range from wireframes to prototypes. Essentially, a wireframe, a mockup, and a prototype are all very similar, and they all live at the same level of abstraction, but they're just differing levels of detail and interactivity. So a prototype is something that's very close to the product, might actually fool you into thinking it's the product, but isn't the actual product. So an example of a prototype would be like an AI app, an app that uses AI, but when you interact with it, you're still on the back end, you still have someone manually interacting with the user as opposed to having the AI program interact with the user. On the other hand, a wireframe is very close to the user flow diagram. It just visually displays what the app should look like. Go ahead to the next slide. So the fifth layer is the surface layer. And this is what people typically talk about when they talk about user interface. And this is basically like the color scheme, visual hierarchy. We had a lecture on this. I don't know if the juniors have seen the lecture on this yet, but essentially the surface of the app is what people see, and it could be what keeps them coming back. So an example of a company that has a really good surface is Recess. They have a web page, you can go look at it. Fantastic design, fantastic colors. And those are the 5 levels of abstraction. So if you go to the next slide, Kyle, I'll pass it back to you to take us through some examples of good UX design, bad UX design, and the dark side of UX design.
So, to get into the bad, there is an app featured in Digital Trends 2013, the worst app of the week. It was called Pocket Heat, and what it does is it turns everything on your phone all at once: the GPS, the accelerometer, and everything in between, to overclock the processor and make your phone generate heat. It drains your battery life in the short term, and running this app is more than a handful of times will lessen the life of your phone overall. The downfall of this app is it's just bad strategy. It solves a problem, but very poorly, because it creates another potentially larger problem. On the flip side, the good is Zoom. We're using it right now. It very quickly became the standard application for team remote settings when the pandemic hit. Zoom is fairly intuitive. You create a room, send a link, the other people click on the link, and you're all in the room together. It's so easy that my 85-year-old grandfather Zooms all the time. Is Zoom perfect? No. Absolutely not. There are several things I would love to see in future updates. I'd love to see an option to automatically lower my hand when I unmute. One of the past updates actually made my camera not work, so I had to install a backdated version. So what can we do to improve our products to enhance our UX even further? This is where we get into testing. There are an abundance of ways that you can test your applications before, during, and after deployment. But right now, we're just going to focus on one type of testing in particular, and that is A/B testing. So if you've ever been to a focus group or participated in a focus group, they work. They're tried and true, but they have their shortcomings. You get a smaller sample set. They're expensive and they can be very time consuming. A/B testing takes all the data you would get from a typical focus group and puts it into deployment. So with A/B testing, what you do is or multivariate testing, you deploy multiple variations at random without having to make a final decision on which one you want to deploy right away. Then you see which option is performing the best and then stop using all the other options. There's also Zellen's design, which is an experiment that is a variation on A/B testing, which algorithmically adjusts the randomization of your deployment so that users are more likely to see the option that is statistically generating the desired outcome more effectively. But at what point do we take UX design too far? Oop, there we go. Dark design or dark patterns, or when UX is designed intentionally to trick or mislead the user, using the user's intuition and predisposition to common patterns against them. One example of this is the sneak into basket, where you click on an item to put in your shopping cart online in a digital store, and you get to checkout, and all of a sudden there's all this new stuff in your basket that you didn't add there, but it automatically ended up in your basket. No bueno. Next, there's confirm shaming, where say you can either subscribe to this free beginner's garden guide or you can opt out. But the verbiage they use in the opt out is no thanks. I know everything about gardening, to make you feel bad for clicking no to begin with. There's also the bait and switch. When Windows 10 was rolling out the update, when Windows 7 was still going around, they opted to get rid of the cancel button and replace it with an upgrade now, where users were used to seeing the cancel button there and would intuitively click there, but instead it was making them upgrade when they didn't want to. And then there's also misdirection. This website, jetstar.com, gives you an option where you are able to not choose your seat and not pay to choose your seat. But they hide it so poorly in their menu that everybody ends up paying extra to choose their seat. If I don't think you can even find it on here. It might be cropped out, which is my fault. But there are also a bunch of other versions of dark designs and dark patterns. Roach Motel, trick questions, privacy zuckering. There are so many different versions of it. But we would urge you to stay away from these patterns because it's very dishonest. And these are some of the resources that we used to build this Tech Talk. Thank you for coming. I'm Kyle Jurassic.
I'm Joe Kinney.
And thank you for coming to our Tech Talk.
Thanks, everyone.
Any questions?
So what was the difference between the mock-up and the prototype on that one slide?
Yeah. So Kyle, if you want to take us back. And this is actually, this is something that confused me when I was learning about it and took me a long time to figure out. They're really they're not that different. A mock-up is, the way that I would conceptualize this is that a wireframe is just very, very basic. You use Balsamiq IQ to put it together. And it's it doesn't have any colors. It doesn't really have any connections. But then for mockup and prototype, you would use Figma to put together a mockup, and then you would animate that mockup using some other sort of software or plugin. There's also a few other programs that people are using. Figma is relatively new. Another one is Sketch. But you basically you make the mockup and then you animate it and make it interactive, and then it's a prototype. And then as a developer, you take that information. So hopefully you have a prototype that you can work off of. But if not, you work off of, a wireframe mockup, whatever, and then you actually program it, and then that's the product. But the key difference between a mockup and a prototype is interactivity and whether or not the app actually like responds to you. And then the difference between a prototype and the actual product is that the product is what you'll be making as a software developer, whereas the prototype is not something that you'll be making as a software developer, unless you're at a smaller company.
So the mockup, you just kind of feign interactivity with animations, and the prototype is actually interactive.
Exactly. And a lot of people, so if you're like raising money to start a company, it's often impractical if you're a non-technical founder to have an actual product. And so what you'll do is you'll take a mock-up or a prototype to customers, and you'll also take that to investors. And a lot of people get funding for their idea or their company simply based off of a mock-up or a prototype. Kind of interesting.
Interesting. Thanks.
This is Mix. I've got a question on like the many more slide. I think it was near the end. What's privacy zuckering? What is that?
So this is actually named after Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg. Funnily enough, where when you are not explicitly opting into your to share private information in an application, but they are sharing that information anyway. So Facebook got into a lot of trouble over that a couple of years ago. So now privacy zuckering is named after Mark Zuckerberg.
Roach
What's-
Motel?
Oh, I had the same question.
What was that? Sorry, what was the question?
Roach Motel, can you elaborate on that one?
I would love to, but I don't know that I remember exactly what it was. Roach Motel and it's when you end up in a situation like a subscription that you didn't explicitly sign up for, but now that you're in, it's very hard to get out. So say you subscribe to, or maybe you did intend to subscribe to like a free trial of something, and then you go to cancel your subscription and the cancel button doesn't work. That would be a Roach Motel. Or you go to cancel your subscription, and instead of being able to do it online, you have to call a customer service line and nobody's available to take your call. Like Fabletics or Sirius XM. I'm just reading the comments, or the New York Times.
Nice. All right. If there are no other questions, let's give Kyle and Joe one last rousing round of applause. Thanks, guys.